Hi, Vegas tea lovers. Thank you so much for coming out and celebrating tea with us. It's beautiful. We get to have these opportunities to celebrate tea, and look at how many of us are here. It's amazing. Next year, we'll have even more people and more people. And right now is a particularly special time for us here in Las Vegas. We are very privileged, not just for this event, but for this entire energy that's flowing through our city of tea. Every year, for several years now, the World Tea Expo has been hosted here in Las Vegas. It is the largest tea business show pretty much in all of the world, so bringing people from all over the world here for tea. And, you know, I'd been coming to Vegas for this show for quite some time, and then I moved here from Hawaii about 4 years ago. And when I moved here, I honestly have to say I felt like I didn't know there was any tea lovers here in town. I really didn't think there was. There was no tea houses. There was no hubs for tea. And, you know, now we're at this point where we have momentum, and Las Vegas is truly becoming the hub of tea here in the United States. And I am really happy that you guys came out to take advantage of this opportunity for having James Norwood Pratt here with us today. We are very privileged to have him. You know, he's somebody I had met very early on in my tea journey of learning about tea. Amazing friend, and I encourage all of you to start your friendship with him and cherish it and appreciate it, because he's an amazing friend and also amazing in all of our education. You know, he's the best educator. He wins awards for it. He's won several awards for it, year after year after year, for the contribution of education that he provides to tea. And I am eternally grateful for all that he's offered and all the inspiration that he's offered of thousands and thousands and thousands of people that I've met all throughout the world. So with no further delay, I would like to introduce one of my best tea friends, James Norwood Pratt.
What a wonderful woman. And what a gracious introduction, at least. Thank you. I should also thank Deandra, who told you what a remarkable program the Las Vegas Public Library offers for free to Las Vegas. I didn't realize that I'd been invited to join such a distinguished lineup, but I was proud to be invited to begin with, but now I feel that I should have dressed better. I'm going to talk to you about tea. But I'll tell you the truth, I'm hoping that I won't be doing all the talking. My real intent here is to give you some encouragement to talk back, and I hope to provoke or inspire some questions in your mind that will make you want to ask me questions so that we can have a dialogue and not just me monologuing here all the time. Now, as best I remember, the subject I was told to talk about today is how tea transformed the world. It did. Most people don't realize it. It's amazing to think about. I can't stop writing books about it because I'm still amazed. You can examine it from any angle you like. You can say tea was responsible for Genghis Khan. You can say tea was responsible for the Industrial Revolution. You'd be right. And most people would be surprised when you said that. They wouldn't realize that, for instance, those people that Genghis Khan organized were nomads who lived in Central Asia on the produce of their flocks and herds. This was a diet of milk and meat. There were no vegetables that you could grow on those endless plains of the steppes, you see. It was not until the Mongol and Turkish kinds of people who were living there got tea that they began to multiply. The reason is that in the absence of vegetables, they were almost completely bereft of vitamin C. And it was only at the time that they began drinking tea, which not only supplied that vital vitamin C, but also, I imagine, was a great aid to the digestion of a diet consisting of mutton and all the other animals they had. Anyway, the Mongols and the Turks multiplied like crazy, and after they had Genghis Khan to lead them, they caused a lot of pain and problems. Genghis Khan is just the example that came off the top of my head about how tea has changed the world. You could also talk about the Industrial Revolution, of which we are all either the beneficiaries or the victims, both probably. The Industrial Revolution was financed by the conquest of India. When the British conquered India, they seized all of the treasuries of the various and the numerous Maharajas and emperors who were ruling India before then. And these people had been taking in taxes and jewels and everything since the beginning of time. It wasn't circulated, it was just in their treasuries. It was only after that treasure was carried back to Europe, to England, and began circulating that there was actual wealth sufficient to finance what we now know was a revolution. It was the Industrial Revolution. And it only took off after 1756, when this young Englishman won a battle in India where the English and their allies were left pretty much in charge of the country. The reason he was in India in the first place, some people say the English traveled abroad looking for a decent meal. I have an English wife, and I don't repeat that joke very often in the interest of domestic tranquility. But nonetheless, she is an excellent cook, so it doesn't apply to the English. I know. It's just true that the English were in India because it was a way station going to China where they were going to try to get tea. And they were vastly surprised to discover, after they had settled down in India for 75 or 100 years, that tea was growing wild right there in the neighboring area of Assam. Being English, of course, they promptly annexed Assam and added it to the Raj, to the India that they already owned and ruled, and started propagating the tea that was growing wild there. But it was tea that had first brought them to India. So how does this story unfurl from the time that innocent plant was first discovered by some Taoist herbalist growing wild in South China? It had a pretty new leaf in the springtime, and they would have been herbalists, you see, and wanted to know what that leaf would do for them. And at first, it was a good food. It sure pepped up salads. You don't use the old leaf, the maintenance leaf on the plant, of course. It's only the new growth that year's, indeed, if possible, that week's new growth that you're looking for. And so it was Taoists, as we would call them today, who developed tea in the first place. It was after a food, they used it to make a kind of tonic. It became medicine, you see, and because of the great properties that this leaf had. The tonic would make you feel better, and they kept improving the taste of the tonic until it became a beverage. And that's what the first Buddhist to come over the Silk Road discovered in China when they finally got there around 200 or 300 years after the time of Jesus Christ. That's how long it took the first Buddhists to get to China from India, where Buddhism had started over 500 or more years before. 800 years, actually. The Buddhists discovered in tea all of the Buddha's teaching entirely, because of the physical effects of the plant on you. You see, the point of Buddhism was to be here now and to be fully awake. And in order to be here, why, you have to be here in mind and body. You can't leave your body at home and just think about things. You have to bring it with you, and you have to have an adjustment so that mind and body are together. And that's what tea does. It provides the human system with a kind of adjustment. And it not only pleases the body with its aroma and taste, indeed the color before you ever lift it to your lips, and the sensation even after you've swallowed, of the aftertaste, and then you follow it into your body and how it warms you. And some teas will affect one organ more than another. And all of this unifying of mind and body was exactly what Buddhism was all about. So wherever the Buddhists settled, they grew tea, they learned how to make tea better and better. They served tea to anybody who came around. And the Buddhist monasteries of China became the great tea-growing centers of the country. Interestingly, the same thing happened with wine in Europe. It was the Christian monasteries which became the centers of wine growing and wine making. Of course, wine has vastly different properties, which call for a different talk. Let's leave that subject. Let's leave another subject dear to my heart that we will explore together another time. The Buddhists were the great tea masters of China in the early days, and nobody else outside of the farmers who had also learned how to grow this plant and learned from the monks in the monastery how to make the leaf into a form that would keep. And you could use that leaf at any time of year, you see, to make that delicious beverage. The Buddhists had taught them how to manufacture the leaf better and better and make the beverage better and better tasting. Now, of course, these were farmers, and these were Buddhists. They weren't even followers of Confucius. They were outside of the ken. They were ignored by the Chinese literati, who continued to use the old word for tea, which was simply a word that covered all herbals of any kind, whatever. The word was te. That's the word we still use. Actually, we call it tea. The Dutch, the Germans, the French, all of our European cousins call it te. And they learned to call it tea because the first people that Europeans had bought tea from, they were the ones who still called it tea also. They were from a part of China where that was the word for tea in their dialect. It wasn't the real word for tea. That was the word that the Buddhists had come up with. and that the farmers used, and it first entered the Chinese dictionary only around the year 725. When that dictionary was published, exactly the year 725, that word was cha. And cha is the word for tea in Chinese now. It's separate from all of the rest of the herbals, you see, because that's what tea is. It comes only from the tea plant. When we're talking about tea, we're not talking about chamomile. Or something else. We're talking about the drink that is made from the leaf that grows on the plant that is called properly by the name tea. The tea plant, botanically speaking, is Camellia sinensis. It's one of the 80 or 90 kinds of camellia. You know, the kind that we grow in the garden that makes the pretty flowers, that's not sinensis, that's japonica, Camellia japonica, Japanese camellia. That's the flowering one. The one that you make tea from is the Chinese camellia, Camellia sinensis. There are only about 60 plants in America, in the world, that contain caffeine. And Camellia sinensis is the only one of the camellias that contains caffeine. And it is only because of this, perhaps, that they began to be interested in tea. And by the time they could make an interesting beverage out of it, they discovered what else is in that leaf. Besides the caffeine, which perks you up and picks you up, there's theanine. That's the chemical name for the part of the tea that calms you down. It's the only thing in all of nature that does both at the same time. Tea will energize you and relax you both at the same time. It's a miracle of vegetation, really. And it's no wonder that it spread all over China, thanks largely to the Buddhists who had borrowed it from the Taoists and who began trading it with everybody who had ever visited and tried tea. So it spread to Korea, to Japan, to South Vietnam, and all of Indochina. And of course, you couldn't grow tea beyond the Great Wall. By the time it was so valuable, however, that people depended on it for their life, literally, because of the vitamin C and other properties, I'm sure. After the first book on tea was written, some tribal leader beyond the Great Wall offered 1,000 head of horses if he could have a copy of the Book of Tea. Now, I've written several books of tea and never gotten a pony, but that's how valuable at one time it was. It came before my time. Yes, please. When was that? The first book of tea, actually the man, his first draft was finished in the year 760. This is AD, of course. And then he continued to work on it for 20 years before he published it in he let it go in its final form, around 780. And think of this, it's only 7,000 characters in Chinese. So it's very hard to understand today what exactly he's saying. Along with some friends, most of them Chinese, of course, we are presently working on an English version of that first book of tea, which, with the aid of the footnotes, will be understandable to us. That first book of tea introduced into polite society that word that the Buddhists and the farmers had been using for tea for hundreds of years by that time, cha. It was cha became a respectable word and a respectable drink in like the elite circles outside of the Buddhist of China. And cha is the word that half of the world uses for tea. You can trace how it spread by the figuring out whether they call it cha or te. We in the West call it te because it shows you we got it from the people in Asia who called it te. In Russia, it's chai. In India, it's chai. It's the cha most places that you go in Asia, whether it's Persia or Japan. They're all using the same word that Lu Yu used because they got it from Chinese sources where that's where it was called. The tea trade was confined to Asia from the time tea first came into general use for around 4,000 years before my ancestors, the Anglo-Saxons, the European people, ever had their first taste of tea. We in the West have known tea for about 400 years only. But by the time we got our first taste of it, the people in Asia had already known tea for 4,000 years. So you've come out today to look face to face at members of this long-standing cult of tea. We are not widespread in America yet, but we're coming. It's not exactly subversive. It's an each one, teach one kind of movement. But it won't be too long before there's a tea lover living right next door to you. Because gradually, like all the other societies, the tea lovers are making America into a tea-consuming society, which it was not before. But it can happen, and it's happening right here before your eyes. When you think about it, people my age in this country grew up in an America that was not a wine-consuming society. And today you can get a good bottle of wine at a fair price wherever you go in this country, and nobody thinks you're putting on airs if you say, what, you don't have any Cabernet Sauvignon? You see, and we can pronounce Cabernet Sauvignon, which is not even English. So why can't our grandkids say, I'm looking for Thi Quan Yin. Where is the Thi Quan Yin on the shelf here, you see? There's a whole vocabulary that goes with tea, just like the vocabulary that goes with wine. And we're just beginning to learn it. So tea is coming to America, and I'm happy to discover, to my surprise, that Las Vegas is leading the way. Not only are you the scene for the World Tea Expo, and you ought to turn out for it if you feel like paying the admission fee, or as Elise said, you ought to go on Friday night, if you can, to the World Tea and Music Festival that Tea-Lit is instrumental in creating right here in Las Vegas. And if you haven't heard of local establishments like Tea and Whisk or that great tea bar at the Lucky Dragon, and I hear good things about a place called, Flock and Fowl. Did you really name a place Flock and Fowl here? Do you have? But anyway, Flock and Fowl, I am assured, is another of the places where you all can go for tea and get good tea. That's the difference, by the way, that you have to learn. The principal distinction to know. It's not too complicated either. Your mouth will tell you which is which. The main difference in the world of tea is between tea and good tea. Good tea is what I'm here to tell you about, And I have nothing bad to say about commodity tea. We need it all over the world. I'm from down south, where iced tea is an important food group. I was raised on iced tea, and that is made with commodity tea, not the kind of tea that makes you rave about it a week later. Oh my God, No, it's just your everyday iced tea, which a Southerner would die without. Well, the world needs a lot of commodity tea, and there's nothing bad to say about it. But good tea is not that easy to find in most places, and yet it can be found. And now it can be found all over Las Vegas. That sort of surprised me. Welcome to the club. You now belong to, you can call it the cult of tea. You can consider it the oldest brotherhood and sisterhood in existence. People were getting together to drink tea and talk about it, just like us today, right here. People were getting together to do this at the time the pyramids were under construction. So I don't think there is any older human activity, social activity, than this. It's because of the great properties that tea has to make you feel sociable. Oh, it's a great comfort in solitude, yes, but have some with somebody across the table and see what happens. It warms the heart, at the same time it loosens the tongue, and before you know it, you'll be describing that girl you went out with before, and how no. You'll tell anything after the second or third cup of tea, and that's how friendships develop, and that's what tea does for us. There are very few things you can name that have contributed as much to human happiness. I so appreciated that question, and please continue to interrupt me with things like that. Yes? Well, good tea on first impression should be like a scene in a Bollywood movie where suddenly music and dancing breaks out all over the stage and people are running around and the spectacle is fabulous and all of that party is happening right inside your mouth. You have a Bollywood production, see, and taste buds that you didn't know were in there wake up, and that's, to me, good tea. And sometimes sometimes I need it to soothe me and calm me. And sometimes I need it to pick me up and get me moving. And good tea will do both. And yes, I thought, yes.
What is the difference between tea from a tea bag and tea from the tea leaf?
Well, they're both tea leaf. It has to come from the tea plant in order to have the taste and to have the effects that I'm talking about. And tea in a tea bag, however, is made to give you almost instant tea, to infuse in short time. So this means the fragments of the leaf have to be very small in order to infuse quickly in water. And so they use what tea trade people call fannings and dust. That's what goes into the tea bags. It's the smallest grade of tea leaf. In orthodox manufacture, you see, to make black tea, why you first of all wither the leaf so you can work with it without its tearing apart. Then you have to roll it All of this was once done by hand. Now we have machines to do it. So after the leaf is withered, it goes into this rolling machine, and it gets mistreated. The effect of the rolling is to bruise the leaf and to express the juice that's inside it. So what happens is the juice is exposed to the air, and it will begin to oxidize. It's like taking a bite out of an apple. If you set it aside, it'll begin to turn brown, right? Well, you break up bruised tea leaf and set it aside, and it'll begin to turn brown or black or red. It'll oxidize. And at a certain point, the tea maker knows from the aroma of the oxidized leaf that it's ready to be fired. And that dries the leaf and removes the moisture, obviously, so that it will survive indefinitely. But now it has to be sorted out. And it used to be that you poured the leaf through the air, and there was a boy who was fanning like crazy, and you see the smallest particle would be blown by the air over there. So you would have a pile of fannings after the whole leaf had fallen. The fannings could be separated that way. And after you scooped up the fannings, there would still be dust on the floor. And it's still tea, and if it was good tree, it'll be good dust. But you can't use it along with the whole leaf or the broken leaf. It has to be used separately because it'll infuse so fast. That's what's in your tea bags. Now, most tea is no longer made in that orthodox way. It's made in a single industrialized method called CTC, curl, tear, crush. And it's just as brutal as the name sounds. The leaf is shredded. It goes onto a conveyor belt so that it oxidizes by the time it gets to the other end of the leaf. That's how the other end of the conveyor belt. That's how tiny the stuff is. And there's a machine that rolls it all up into little pellets. They'll all be the same size. That's CTC tea. And sometimes there's nothing wrong with it. My problem is there's nothing great with it. They have stripped it of whatever character that leaf had, whatever character it had developed in the field. No longer exists. It's not distinguishable. So a lot of your tea bags tea will be this industrial product, CTC. It doesn't mean that it's bad. It does mean it's never going to be great. You're never going to have, although we now have pretty good tea in tea bags because we have a pyramid bag that'll hold whole leaf teas. So the tea bag has its place, and not all of them are, I used to say, not all of them are contemptible. Many are beneath contempt. And that's still true, but I have to add these days, a great many of them, a growing number, are far above contempt. That's the pyramid tea bag kind. So now I see very poorly, so you have to gesture wildly, you see, to get my attention. And then I will spot you as I've just seen you, and you have a question, sir. Very little. Well, the fact is that the big tea, so to speak, and that's Lipton's and Tetley and all of the mass market tea bags that you find in supermarkets, which are usually being sold at bargain rates. That's the main part of the tea business in America. And they are the guys who run the Tea Association of America. And every person who discovers good tea is a person who is lost to them. He's not going to go back to drinking Tetley after he's tried some of the teas that we have right outside today. He's going to much prefer this and that favorite tea that he got from Teelet. And then there are those others from Harney and Sons that he's found. You see, none of these are going to be promoted by the Tea Association of America. That's the tea bag crowd, and they have their row to hoe, and they certainly have their place. Unfortunately, at the time that I first took an interest in tea, they dominated the scene to the exclusion of everything else. So the companies and the individuals who are procuring good tea for us don't have the money to go on television. And you have to learn about it like this. It's semi-secret gatherings where, you see, we're not shy about sharing the passwords to our pleasures. We will tell you, if you never have, you absolutely must taste Da Hong Pao. You see, and you'll say, what? And then somebody will teach you that Da Hong Pao is this particular oolong that comes from this particular place, and you will have discovered a particular pleasure that you didn't know before. And this is how our culture expands individually. This is cultivating our taste in the most essential meaning of the term. And it's going on right now almost underground. Yes?
When was milk added to tea?
Excellent question. And I think the answer is when those people beyond the Great Wall, with their flocks and herds who were living on milk and meat, you see, got the first tea. And the Chinese learned that those guys would put milk in their tea, and therefore they didn't like green tea, which didn't take to milk. And the Chinese learned how to make more darker and darker tea for those customers. Now, those people from beyond the Great Wall wound up, after many centuries, ruling China. That's who the Manchu dynasty were. They were the people from Manchuria, you see. They were not native Chinese. They were Manchu. And they brought with them to China the practice that they had at their mother's knee, you see, of putting the milk in the tea. And it was black tea that they preferred for this reason. And the English, who were dealing with the Manchu authorities, noticed this. And they occasionally, an Englishman was even admitted to the presence of the emperor. And one wrote home that he was amazed that the Emperor Qianlong used so very much milk in his tea, you see. So I think that's when it was first done, and the English got the idea and took it back home. Yes, did you? No, you were not gesturing wildly enough. Yes, please.
So if Las Vegas is considered the epicenter of this tea revolution, I'm a part-time resident here. My primary residence is in Michigan, but I travel a lot throughout the United States. So if I'm looking for good tea, what would my resource be? Yelp? The internet? I really don't know.
Well, I would say that the epicenter, the place where there are the biggest concentration of tea businesses and tea lovers who are supporting those is my own hometown of San Francisco. And that's not to say that Las Vegas is not an important outpost in this coming tea world. That's right. And another important outpost is Ann Arbor, Michigan, where you have the great Zingerman's, which gives you this fabulous collection of good tea. And it is curated. I mean, an important store will have a curated collection, you see. They will have some of the tea-lit teas, they will have some of the Harney teas, they will have some from other sources for their customers to choose from. But you have to find such a store as that. It's not easy to find on the supermarket shelves. And on the internet, once you start searching, you will be amazed at what you can find. And a number of people now have learned even how, on the internet, to order tea directly from the tea producer in India or China or Japan or something. So you can go crazy on the internet doing all these things that, thankfully, I am prevented from doing, not only by eyesight but by age. The internet does not like people over age 50. You see, it opposes obstacles to us. It rejects passwords. And so you who are able to operate the internet have a huge advantage over the rest of us. But that's the place you could. Yes, ma'am. Yes, isn't that interesting? It's true. It is absolutely true. And I believe that the first thing that's driving our turn toward tea is indeed the health benefit of tea that we are more and more being told about. It's absolutely true. There's nothing known in nature that's better for you than tea drinking. And green tea was the first to be looked at by scientists who were documenting this. And the reason it was green tea that they first of all examined in its benefits is because the first scientists looking at it were in Japan, where they drink nothing but green tea. There wasn't anybody else to investigate. See, they were all green tea lovers. And now it is well established that green tea is particularly effective at preventing cancers. Isn't that interesting? Now, different teas affect you differently, and it turns out that black tea is particularly effective at improving and maintaining cardiovascular health. You see, so my opinion is that if you are a hardened and shameless tea drinker who consumes quantities, it doesn't matter whether it's black or green, you're going to get all of the benefits if only you drink enough of it. But yes, there are now around 1,000 research papers a year that are coming out on the health benefits of tea, and they are amazing. Yes, please.
I was wondering, in reverse of that, are there any, not benefits, but ill effects? Can you drink too much tea? Because I know it's diuretic.
Well, yes, you can drink too much tea if you have an empty stomach, or other conditions that will make it disagreeable to you. I don't think it could be fatal, but sometimes it can be somewhat unpleasant to have too much tea. I confess that's rarely the case with myself. And I think I probably would have too much tea if only I could. Yes.
Can you give some commentary on Native American teas? Because I read in their culture they explored using teas and things like that.
Now, when you say teas, do you mean things besides tea from the tea plant?
Yes.
All right, because there are other sources of caffeine that have been developed. And the only one in North America is a plant called yopon. And it grows in the American South, particularly in Virginia, North Carolina, and then south all the way to Texas. And yopon has pretty potent caffeine. And the Native Americans called it the black drink, and it was known very widely. I'm not sure how many Indians used it, but they traded it, just the same as they would trade tobacco back and forth. And so yopon was drunk, practically on the West Coast, far, far from where it was grown. It was known around. In South America, they have yerba mate. And then there's something else growing in the Andes, guayaca or something like that, which is again has caffeine in it. And all of these plants have other qualities besides just the caffeine, and all of them became used by the indigenous people. And I have tried all of them, and there's a friend of mine who has made a ready-to-drink. It's in a bottle. He calls it American Buzz, and it's a blend of yopon and these other caffeines from the New World. And so get a buzz on. Go drink some of this stuff. Tell me what it tastes like. I'm not going to be the one to do it. Yes, sir. Sorry. Yep.
The industry sort of changed and was, I guess, somewhat brought to the general public attention by
Called Argo?
Tazo tea.
Oh, Tazo, yes.
Is it sort of a misnomer because so many of those teas are based on flowering plants and aromatic spices?
They're not teas, are they? They're not tea. They are herbals. You can call them tisanes. You can call them anything you please. It is technically and I think spiritually wrong to call the Tazo products teas. Although it was a great tea man who started the company, and it was run away from him. Yes, please go on.
No, that was my question. Your thoughts on that?
All right, my thoughts on Tazo and the other purveyors of herbals is that they have probably filled an important niche. There will always be people who very much enjoy those drinks or similar drinks from whatever. I've recently discovered elderflower, which grows in New England and which produces a divine tisane for, let's say, after supper, when you don't want any caffeine in your system, but you need something just perfect to finish a beautiful meal. I would never have tasted elderflower before. So anyway, these things are now available, and Tazo does a pretty good job of blending up some stuff. But I'm a tea man. I'm not really interested in yard grass and weeds. I can't. Yes, go on.
My question is, when you compare caffeine and tea, how does tea come out in terms of its
Caffeine content.
and its caffeine problems and things like that?
Well, if you had a pound of tea and compared it to a pound of coffee, why, there would actually be more caffeine in the tea by weight. It's something like, I don't know the percentage, but anyway, there's more caffeine in tea by weight. But you don't eat the tea, you see. You can make 200 cups of tea out of that pound of tea. You can, and if you steep the tea more than once, you can make 600 cups, perhaps, you see, if it were a green tea, for instance. So that pound of coffee is going to yield 40, at most 50 or 60 cups of coffee. So the cup of tea that you have, if we're talking American 4 or 5 ounces, it will have maybe half as much caffeine as a cup of American coffee. That's a very rough rule of thumb, but I think no, just because of what you get. Once you have extracted the coffee from the coffee beans and extracted the nectar of the tea leaf, that's the amount of tea of caffeine in the 2 drinks. That's all. And yes, you do have to use boiling water to get the extraction from coffee. Beware of using boiling water with green tea. Don't you do it. You will cook the leaf just like you were pouring boiling water over spinach. You don't want to cook your green tea. You want to extract the nectar. So don't use boiling water, which will cook it. Use water that's well under boiling, about 20 degrees less than boiling. And don't steep it too long. You'll get the bitterness that you don't want. So a short steep with green tea, and then you can come back to that leaf and steep it again and again. One time, I was determined to see how long I could get flavor out of this particular green tea that was famous for standing up to many infusions. And I gave up before the leaf did. I think it was something like 20 times that I had infused it, and it was still giving you something that you would drink. So it can be used many times, and you have a question. Yes?
So I think that the biggest obstacles in creating a tea society in America, which is what I would really love to see, is really education. Like even in Vegas, you don't really see so many places where they use like the gong fu, right? The infusions and things like that. It's always in the cups, which is really not
True.
my favorite way of doing it. So if the biggest obstacle is really education, is there an association that, in your opinion, is well positioned to produce some kind of a certificate for something like a tea sommelier?
Oh, who paid you to ask that question? This is... She's not a plant. We do not know each other. The World Tea Academy offers classes about all the teas that you can imagine, and they are graduated classes. You can at different levels. And the World Tea Academy is run by my good and dear friend, Donna Feldman. You will have no better teacher anywhere in the world. And all of this can be done over the internet. And it's very serious and very worth doing for a person like you or me, who is really interested in tea and to the degree that we are. And, of course, what happens is once any one of us discovers something that we like, we don't keep it to ourselves. This is the main education. We share what we enjoy, and we share what we have learned. We will be sure to show somebody else the way to do gong fu tea preparation, which you and I have learned and enjoy. And just like the taste for wine seeped gradually into the country, something of the sort is happening with tea, and it's you and me doing it. And yes, please.
The Japanese tea ceremony is world famous. What is the history of that and Japan's take on tea, which is such an important beverage?
Yes, it is. Japan never had any tea until after the year 800, after the time of Liu Yu, the writer of that first tea book. And they, of course, were copying their big brother, China. I mean, that was the source of wealth, of culture. You know, if you could learn to wear Chinese silk, and you could learn to use Chinese porcelain and all of these things. Well, somebody brought tea back. And at first, of course, as it was everywhere, tea was restrained. It was restricted to an elite. It was only the wealthy and the powerful who could have it. And it was many years in the making before a man named Rikyu, in about the time of Shakespeare, came along in Tokyo and perfected what had developed into not just a get-together for tea, but a formal ceremony would be the right word. And this ceremony was for different purposes. Rikyu was taken everywhere by the man who ruled Japan at the time, and before he went into battle, before he would start the next fight, he would always go to Rikyu and sit down, and they would have tea together for that centering that I was talking about, so that this man had his head on his shoulders when he went out there to possibly lose the head off his shoulders. And that ceremony has been preserved since Shakespeare's day in Japan. And in fact, the main teachers of that ceremony are the descendants of Rikyu's family. And it was the 15th generation descendant with whom I once had tea. And he was at the time an older man than I am now. And he was Shinso Rikyu the 15th. And it was, of course, this enormous honor for me to be introduced and invited to have tea with him. He came to have tea with me. And he, as a young man, once he had finished his father's basic training in tea, he was drafted. And he was in the Japanese Air Force. And when they found out who he was, why, his duty was to have tea with the kamikaze pilots. So the last thing that young hero did was have tea with this Japanese noble, you see, and then get up and bow his thanks to Shinso Rikyu and put the white scarf around his neck to go kill himself. Walk directly from the place where they had tea, no further than that exit sign, to get in his airplane and go die. So this is the significance that tea could have for those people who developed it in a ceremonial fashion so far. When he came for tea with me, he wanted to have not Japanese but American tea. So I was not required to commit suicide, you see. And afterwards, he wanted to see how I washed up. You see, in his view, and he taught me this, the tea is not over until all of the utensils have been washed and put back in their place, ready for the next time. That's the completion of the thing. The ceremony is from start to finish. And you're not finished until everything is ready to go all over again. That was one of the great days of my life. And thank you for asking. Now,
How do you recommend making black tea to make it the best?
well, I always say the way to make tea right is to make it wrong a few times. And I generally like my black tea steeped 3 minutes. But sometimes it's better if it's steeped twice that long. And so the way I find out is just to experiment. And that goes for the amount of tea that you use, or you just have to figure it out. Figure it out. I can't give you better advice. Yes, please.
We make such a distinction between the green and the black. Do they come from different places originally?
Oh, bless you. I said it's a miracle of vegetation. Well, let me tell you. You take that leaf off the same plant and you let it wither, and you can make one of 6 categories of tea with that same leaf. If you take it, let it wither, and then just dry it in the sun. Now we're talking about just two leaves and a bud. Or sometimes just the bud. See, the bud is the end of the growing shoot. It's the unopened leaf. It doesn't have any chlorophyll yet because it hasn't opened up and become a leaf. It's a leaflet, I guess you would say. And so they usually make tea out of two leaves and a bud, the end of the shoot. And if you let that leaf wilt, and then you kill it with heat. Suppose you put it in a hot wok, and then as soon as you have sort of fried it, why, you've just made green tea. And that you can have it for lunch, and you're drinking the nectar of the leaf that was on the bush before breakfast, you see. Now, take that same leaf and let it wilt, and then bruise it and leave it to oxidize a while before you kill it with heat. And when you kill it with heat, you have made black tea. Now, the black tea will be almost fully oxidized. The green tea will be almost totally unoxidized. But you don't have to let it go all the way in oxidation. You can stop it in between that, and in that case, you've made something delicious called oolong tea, in between black and green. So if black tea is oxidized, green tea is unoxidized, they call oolong semi-oxidized. The tea term is fermented, so it's semi-fermented, if you prefer. And then there is yellow tea. Then there is pu'er tea. So these are other families, all made from the same leaf, depending on what you do with it, depending on the process for making it. Now, of course, we know that you can make white wine with any grape juice. But why would you do that if you're using Pinot Noir grapes? That's great for a red wine. You could make a white, but it would be wrong. You could make a green tea out of cumin. But please don't. Cumin is such a magnificent black tea, and it's just so-so when you make green tea. In fact, all the cumin is a county. It's in the province of Anhui. at the foot of one of the sacred mountains in China, and it grows a hell of a lot of tea. And they used to make, it was all green tea. After all, most of the people in China drink green tea. Something like 80% of the tea they make is green. Well, it took a young man who failed to pass his exam, and he couldn't face his father, the tea maker, who had sent him off to become a government official. So he hung his head and he took a job in a tea factory because that was the family trade. But this place was making black tea to sell to the foreigners. He learned how black tea was made, and he went home and told his daddy, now look, I didn't pass, you got to forgive me, but boy, did I bring home some interesting stuff, information. Let me show you how to make black tea, because those crazy English will pay anything for it. The first Keeman was made thanks to this kid around the year exactly the year 1875, or at least it was first sold in England that year. And it was a smash hit. And by 1880, there was nobody in Keeman County who wasn't making black tea instead of green tea, because the black tea tasted so great. There is something called myrcenol in the Keeman plant, which is not found in other tea varietals. Myrcenol is also found in bay leaf. And you know, there's a certain flavor that nothing else will give you. Well, there's a certain flavor that gives to the tea from Keeman that you can't get from any tea anywhere else, and it's fabulous. And so Keeman, hot Keeman tastes like, smells like toast fresh out of the oven. It's divine. Anyway, that's as much as I have to say about that. Yes. Yes, please.
What is white tea then, if everything's not?
Well, it has not been oxidized at all. And if the sun isn't shining bright enough, maybe you could put a light bulb there or something to dry the leaf. But white tea is simply the leaf that has been dried, and there it is. Now, if you get the new grown leaf in the springtime, and you can use just the bud, you make one of the world's most expensive teas, which is the white tea called silver needle. The Chinese name is yinjian, which means silver needle. But after that, if you wait a while and you pluck the leaf, why, you have just made shomei, which is white tea, but it's not just the bud, it's the open leaf, and it's dried. And of course, there's a lot more shomei than there is yinjian, and of course, it's not nearly as expensive. And the people all over South China swear that this is the hot weather drink that they would die without. And so it is. White tea need not be that terribly expensive, but that's what it is. It's just a dried tea leaf. And I'm sorry, yes? I was mistaken. Yes, please. Matcha is powdered tea. Matcha is, of course, originally from Japan, and it was the tea ceremony tea. And the way they made tea, and still do, was using this powdered leaf, which you put a measure of tea in the bowl. You make it 1 cup at a time, 1 bowl at a time, actually. And then you use hot water, not boiling, and you have to use a bamboo whisk. And you whisk that tea until you get a wonderful foam on top. And then you present that bowl of tea to your guest. And if the guest has been brought up and trained properly, why, she will know to drink it in 3 big slurps. The third slurp, you turn the bowl up right in front of your face, and it's a particular slurp that will give you all of the foam. And that's supposed to be the best tasting tea that you can possibly have. And the first time I did that, I got the message that you can only get from the experience. When you turn the tea bowl up in front of your face, you see nothing. You've just blotted out everything else, and you are taking in, you're aware of nothing else except that taste in your mouth, and you have truly become one with the tea. And it is a moment there that I guess you could prolong it, but it's almost a mystical or a psychedelic experience that happens. And you have to have that tea bowl, and you have to have that whisked kind of tea. The Japanese had learned this way of making tea from Song Dynasty China. And this was the way that tea was made, not in Lu Yu's time, but a couple hundred years later. They were grinding up that leaf, and this was green tea, which had been very carefully grown, very carefully ground. So you see, you're taking, with matcha, you're not just steeping the leaf, you're ingesting the leaf. And let me tell you, it packs a wallop. I mean, you think that tea has caffeine in it. When you drink it, try eating it. Like, this is going to really show you some energy. And in Song China, this was the preferred way among everybody who belonged to the upper classes. Then came Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan and his Mongols exterminated the upper classes. And after 80 years, there wasn't anybody who could even remember how to make powdered tea in China. But it was preserved in Japan, you see, as if in a time capsule. The Mongols never conquered Japan. They wanted to, never did. And the Japanese cut off contact with the outside world. And so things that they had learned were preserved there, and that includes the Japanese tea ceremony. And yes.
Yeah, it's a soft voice, but Mr. Pratt, first of all, I want to thank you for being here today and imparting your tea wisdom on us. This is my first step in my tea journey, and I'm a little excited because I feel like I have a new love in my life now. But could you suggest, is there a book, like a 101 in tea, so I can at least start learning the vocabulary?
Yes, see me after the meeting. I think I can help. This is I started just like you. Other than the commodity tea that I'd grown up on, why, I had very little experience of good tea. It started, my grandmother thought she was drinking good tea. She thought it was the same tea that Queen Victoria drank. And I'm glad that she died before the tea bag and before anybody told her that was just what the first colony company wanted her to think. They called their fanciest tea sold throughout the South was called Queen's Blend. And of course, it had been marketed since Victoria was on the throne, and all of the ladies who were addicted to Queen's Blend would tell you that, of course, Her Majesty had this every afternoon, the same as they did. But when I went to college, you had to be interviewed by professors to determine if they wanted you in their class. And so they would have you over for tea. And this particular Tweedy figure that I was very intimidated by, when I first walked in, he said, "So, Mr. Pratt, are you a Darjeeling man?" And I said, "No, sir, I'm from Forsyth County." And I'd never heard of Darjeeling, you know. And now, of course, I bow, and the name is mentioned. It's the region in India that produces some of my favorite teas. Some of the best teas in the world come from Darjeeling. And so I guess I'm a Darjeeling man now. But I'm also a Keeman man, and I've got a lot of other allegiances. So you've got a beautiful journey ahead of you. And when I started my tea journey, there had not been a book on tea written in English in over 50 years. So if there was going to be a good book about it, I realized I was going to have to write it. And that's what I've been doing ever since. And you are my ideal student. Thank you. Yes, were you?
So one thing, unfortunately, that really boils my blood is the labels on some tea and food of organic and non-organic. Can you go into some of the obstacles that we might face when we're trying to get a tea that has zero pesticides, that is sourced in a humane way?
Can I do what?
Can you go in maybe some of the things that you look for if you're looking at a tea? I know a lot of times some of the problems that are talked about is the fact that if something's labeled organic, it's not necessarily organic.
All right, let me go from organic, because when I'm looking for tea, one of the first things I want to know is whether you call this organic. Because if you do, I'm really suspicious. There's not too much good organic tea. Don't know why. I mean, I have friends who've explained this to me. Tea requires a lot of nitrogen, and to get more than one crop a year, well, you got to feed it nitrogen, and so a lot of people do. And that means it's not organic. They've used some kind of chemical fertilizer. The plant doesn't know the difference. It doesn't care where its nitrogen comes from. But if it doesn't get everything that it wants to eat, the tea is going to suffer. So there's a lot of poor organic tea. And it need not be organic to be pure. Mind you, you don't eat the leaf, you steep it, you see, and they don't apply pesticides in these countries or herbicides unless there's a disaster, unless there's an emergency. These are poor people living in the backwoods of countries that are not rich. And nobody wants to lug 100 pounds of anything up the mountain to put on the bushes, not if you can help it. Now, if there's an outgrowth of some kind of, like there's something called red spider, which has to be contained, and you would spray those bushes that had red spider. But you would only spray after they have been plucked, you see. And the growth that comes next was not even on the plant at the time that it was sprayed. So there is no residue on that leaf. And believe me, the European Union has such strict standards measuring residues that if there were any residue, they would find it out. And that's one of the largest tea markets in the world. So nobody who is growing tea to sell on the international market is going to allow it to have any residue in the leaf that would exclude it from the European market. So even if, my point is, even if it did have any residue on it, it wouldn't do you any harm. What amounts to parts per million, perhaps on the leaf, are going to, in the cup, be parts per billion. There's no chance of you getting anything unpleasant from drinking tea. Organic is a good idea in terms of farming, but is often problematic in terms of tea quality. Yes, ma'am. The larger the container, the longer the shelf life. We usually buy tea in 4-ounce containers, and so it will indeed go stale in time. If you can keep it longer, if you keep it out of light, if you keep it closed so that there's not a lot of exposure to air, and of course, don't leave an open tea box or something on the shelf with, you can make garlic tea real easy. I mean, tea absorbs odors and stuff. So with any care at all, your tea will be good for some months, And I have a little bag of tea that I bought in 1986 in Paris, which is Darjeeling, and I just want to see how long it'll last. How long will it age? And so every year I make another little cup of that tea, and it's still with me. Now, it has become a kind of ghost of itself. I remember what it tasted like fresh, and it's not that anymore. It's lost most of its character, but it has not gone bad. You would say that it's stale, but sometimes so am I. And tea will age, I have also discovered. If you leave it unmolested in a large enough container for a long enough time, it will develop all kinds of wonderful character. Now look, I've talked about tea until I'm dry in the mouth, and they've got it right outside. And why don't we all go and have some and continue to talk about tea there? And unless you have any pressing questions that absolutely require me to remain on this stage, why don't we go and adjourn? I have some books which you can purchase. And I think there are some left, and my wife will be very grateful if you will take them off my hands. Listen, thank you very much. This has been a great pleasure for me.